So, one major contribution from law and economics to the field of criminal law is this idea that there is a rational model of criminal behavior. And this idea actually goes way back, Jeremy Bentham and such. But Gary Becker, a Nobel laureate from University of Chicago, is one who formalized it in the modern literature. And so we can we can just use words to get the intuition of this model pretty easily. So if you're someone who's thinking about committing a crime, you're going to weigh the benefits of that crime. So let's say we're talking about a financial crime where maybe I'm going to embezzle money from an employer or something along those lines. Then it's easy to think about the benefit of the crime being the money I can get if I get away with it, right? So maybe $1 million. Great. What am I going to weigh that against? Well, on the other side of the equation is the probability that I'll get caught times the punishment if I am caught. And that punishment could be a fine, right? Or very often in criminal law, it is incarceration. You get a jail term of 2 years, whatever the term would be. Now, if the benefit of engaging in the criminal activity is greater than what's on the other side, the probability of being caught times the punishment if I'm caught, then I should engage in this criminal activity. Maybe there's a 50-50 chance I get caught. If I get caught, I have to pay back the money, which is $1 million, right? Well, in that case, it makes sense for me to take this money. If I get $1 million for taking it, I'm weighing that against a 50-50 chance of getting caught with a punishment of paying back $1 million. Why not? There's more benefit than there is cost. There's a 50-50 chance I get away with it and I just have $1 million. And the other 50% of the time, I just have to pay back what I got, so I end up kind of the same as I was to start with. Now, obviously, this is a simplification. It's also not an accurate simplification in that punishment wouldn't be paying back the money you stole if you got caught stealing. You would be subject to something like jail time. That's when it gets a little bit harder, right? So we have to think, what is it worth? What does it cost to me to sit in a federal prison for 2 years because I'm caught stealing and embezzling $1 million? That's where it's much harder to put a dollar sign on that, which is kind of what we have to do to be able to compare it to what's going on the other side. Now, it's hard to do that, but people have some sense of how much they would dislike having to do something, having their liberty taken away, having to sit in some kind of facility, a jail or a prison. So even though potential criminals don't think exactly in these terms, this simple model can capture a lot of the essence of the sort of behavior we see. Now, one thing coming out of this model, especially in the early days, was this idea that, well, as a society, we care a lot about deterrence, which is the cost side of this equation, right? The probability of being caught times the punishment if you're caught. Now, one thought was, well, the probability of getting caught, that's actually really expensive for us to push up if we're society, because it means hiring a whole bunch of specialized police officers, essentially. If we're going to catch everyone who commits a crime, it means we need to invest a lot in investigating crimes. And that takes a lot of police work. That means we have to spend a whole lot on police. Now, the punishment if you're caught, so it's costly to keep people in prison. There's no doubt about that. The prison population has exploded in the last 30 years in this country, and it cost us a lot of money to incarcerate people. If we're thinking about punishment as a fine, then it looks really different, right? So if the punishment of catching someone for committing a financial crime is for them to pay back, I don't know, 5 times what they tried to steal, as a society, that means we are getting money coming in. And that's a good thing. That's a lot better than having to pay money as a society to incarcerate people, or spending a whole bunch of money on police to increase the probability of getting caught. So one thought that this model kind of led to was, well, why don't we let the probability of being caught stay fairly low, but ratchet up the punishment, especially if that punishment can be a fine. And then as a society, we can get the optimal level of deterrence or a good level of deterrence without having to expend a bunch of social resources to do that. Now, it turns out that this basic idea hasn't held up all that well in practice. Why? Well, as I'm sure many of you have a gut intuition, criminals aren't great at rational thinking. The sort of people that we see engaging in a lot of crimes don't tend to be the sort of people who are carefully weighing risks and benefits of things. The model does capture a lot of basic thinking along these lines, but we see some less than rational behavior when it comes to something like, well, they double the prison sentence for a certain drug crime. Do we see less of that drug activity? Usually, no. It's been really hard to find evidence of behavior changing because punishment has ratcheted up, whether that's talking about fines or jail time. We do see behavior change more when the probability of being caught goes up. So it does seem that even though it's more costly from a social standpoint, ratcheting up the probability of getting caught seems to have a bigger effect on deterrent behavior. And part of this is probably due to the way people who are engaging in criminal activity discount what happens in the future. So what happens a month from now matters a lot. What happens 5 or 10 years from now is not something they're thinking about a whole lot at the moment. A lot of people who are engaging in criminal activity are relatively young. And so young people famously have high discount rates, meaning they don't value the future in a big way. They also have discount rates that are hard to pin down. They may change depending on when you ask them. So it's probably no big surprise. This simple little model doesn't do a great job of capturing activity. It does a decent job, but not a great job. So it's useful to think about rational behavior when it comes to thinking about criminal activity. It's also important to look at some of the realities that this simple model doesn't capture when we're thinking about actual policies coming out of that.